snow, and summertime. A man fights shaded monsters to protect his daughter in the ruins of a modern city. Over 1,000 years later, the same man ventures out from a medieval village in search of a cure for her illness. I recently played through Nier, the original version released in 2010 in the West for the Xbox 360 and PS3, the version with the dad as the main character. Nier can be described as an action-adventure title, and one that wears its influences on its sleeve. The core structure is extremely similar to a 3D Zelda title, specifically Ocarina of Time, featuring a central field map that connects several villages and dungeon areas, and a mid-game time skip that mixes up elements of the world and its characters. Visually, the game takes a large cue from Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, featuring not just the bloom that was ubiquitous in this era of gaming, but that specifically naturally grown over, green and golden, post-apocalyptic medieval look. For the most part, this is an example of strong art direction shining through technological limitations, such as the sometimes extremely low-resolution textures or poor performance. You'll see familiar architecture, repurposed and recontextualized by both nature and the remaining inhabitants of this new world, sepia-tinted views that feel like faded photographs of our world gone by, as well as moments of colorful natural beauty that affirm that not all is yet lost. The innovative aspects of Nier are the frequent gameplay shakeups. Although the primary gameplay is a pretty basic third-person action game, Nier also utilizes elements in the shmup or bullet hell genre within its core combat, as well as frequently orienting the camera in unusual ways to facilitate this. As someone who has begun to explore that classic corner of gaming over the last few years, it was very cool to see those familiar gameplay and visual motifs be utilized like this. The main character's magic skill set therefore is designed to function both in the standard 3D perspective, as well as the occasional top-down segments, which is pretty interesting. Then there's an entire section of the game that essentially plays out as a visual novel, with characters venturing into each other's dreams. This is also the first taste of the meta elements to come, of which this game features many of. There's also a brief excursion into a survival horror setting, with Nier again adjusting the gameplay format and presentation to match. The single greatest element of Nier for me was the soundtrack. It was composed by Keiichi Okabe, Kakeru Ishihama, Keigo Hoashi, and Takafumi Nishimura. The vocals in many of these tracks was provided by Emi Evans. It reminded me a lot of Yasunori Mitsuda's work, specifically on Chrono Cross, where several exotic and esoteric forms of composition and instrumentation are utilized with extremely strong melodic songwriting and production. Nier's music can broadly be described as beautifully haunting, with even the more upbeat tracks still maintaining this element of longing, nostalgia, and sadness. While playing through the game, I was frequently stopped in my tracks by the mesmerizing combinations of the visuals and music. Beyond the songwriting aspects, the technical aspects of the mixing and production of the soundtrack is also top-notch, with shimmering, crystallized pianos, warm acoustic guitars, bold, punchy percussion, and extremely clean and airy vocals. The vocal performances for the characters as well is also top-notch. These aspects, combined with the high-quality storyline and cutscenes, ensure that Nier is going to be a regular emotional gut punch experience for most players, myself included. So we have the gameplay structure of a classic Zelda, the visual stylings of Team Ico, and a Yasunori Mitsuda caliber soundtrack, with a very evocative storyline and setting on top of that. I imagine that description makes Nier sound like one of the best games ever, but unfortunately, Nier does not reach the peaks of those titles. The primary appeal of Nier is definitely in that aesthetic aspect. The storytelling, the innovative meta elements, and the aforementioned dreamlike and bizarre visuals that blend beautifully with that incredible soundtrack. Unfortunately, the gameplay is not up to those same standards. Nier is held back by several elements in that department, the most glaring of which is undoubtedly the backtracking and repetition. In a standard single playthrough, multiple dungeons are revisited several times, with nearly identical content each time. Even the visual novel section is repeated, and within these dungeons, you'll also sometimes be experiencing some of the most rudimentary block-pushing puzzles this side of the earlier Tomb Raider games. None of these puzzle elements are remotely challenging, and are almost seemingly designed to waste your time. I know that's a harsh thing to say, but there are moments here where I was genuinely wondering whether or not a section was designed to function as a parody of certain tropes in game design. After all, the game is certainly clearly doing so in other moments, so it's hard to say. For example, early on in the game, the side quests of the main character's village are all simultaneously unlocked, and the sheer number of the menial tasks that the villagers want you to do seem to be poking fun at this aspect of certain RPGs. The backtracking and repetition goes from annoying to a potential deal breaker when you consider that in order to uncover the full plot and all of the endings of the game, which are required to fully understand what's really going on in the game, you must play at a bare minimum the entire game once, the second half of the game again, the second half of the game again, but now with the requirement of having all of the weapons fully upgraded before the final dungeon. Now, to save yourself from having to completely play the second half of the game for a third time, you'll want to make an additional save at the last possible opportunity, and then make the first choice offered in the ending. Then, after completing the ending on that last save, load that save and play through the entire endgame sequence again, but this time make the other choice. To be clear, each of these ending routes does feature some new story content, cutscenes, and dialogue, which recontextualizes the storyline of the game in an evocative way, but in my opinion it is not nearly enough to warrant replaying these same sections, each of which already contains replaying the same areas and content to begin with. Even worse is the fact that the emotional gravitas of these cutscenes and story beats begins to wear off after watching them so many times in succession. Therefore, my recommendation, if you plan on seeing everything Nier has to offer, would be to either greatly space out each ending route or playthrough over a few months, or just watch the stuff after the first ending on YouTube. The novelty of the meta elements and the emotional impact of the final ending are certainly worth experiencing firsthand if possible. There are many jaw-dropping moments in this game, and the final one in that last ending is the biggest of all, but the impact of said moment is undoubtedly going to be lessened if you've burnt yourself out on the game by experiencing the same content over and over and over again. I don't think the multiple playthroughs to get the full story was warranted, and I think that the overall experience of Nier would have been much stronger had all of the elements that are revealed on the subsequent playthroughs had just been incorporated into the first and only one. Nier received a remaster 11 years after its original release, which is available on modern platforms. This version of the game is based on the original concept of the younger main character, so Papa Nier is stuck on the 360 and PS3, with the exception of a small optional bit of content where you can play as him. To contextualize, the Japanese Xbox 360 version of the game and the subsequent Western releases of the game replaced the main character, who was originally a teenager, with this rugged-looking older man because they felt he would be more appealing to Western audiences. In turn, the character who was originally the main character's sister became his daughter. The remaster is titled Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139. Why the weird number? Well, it's actually the square root of 1.5, which is basically what the remaster can be interpreted as, like a further iteration of the original game. Aesthetically, it is mostly similar to the original, with the biggest differences being the color grading being overall more bleak and washed out, higher detail environments, revised character models, and an entire re-recording of the original soundtrack. I listened to both versions of the soundtrack in detail, and I have to say I do prefer the original versions of the music. The vocal elements have been emphasized in most of these new renditions, leading to thinner and less engaging mixes that definitely don't hit the same as the originals. For me anyway. Unfortunately, the remaster does not offer the option to utilize the original OST. There is a mod available for the PC version that aims to restore the original music, but it's a work in progress. Currently only restores about a third of the tracks, and it hasn't been updated since July of 2023. The remastered version does feature greatly improved combat, courtesy of Takahisa Tora of Platinum Games, which is great, and a frame rate not locked to 30, which is also nice. There's also the addition of an entirely new ending route, which was previously only featured in supplemental material released after the original game and was not included in the original for budgetary and time reasons. This again requires revisiting a huge portion of the game before undergoing a few hours of entirely new content. Having checked out this ending on YouTube, I do think it severely undermines the impact of the prior ones, but that's just my opinion. Overall, I do think that Nier Gestalt / Replicant / whatever is definitely worth playing at least once. As said in the beginning, I played it on a real Xbox 360. I tried emulating it on Xenia, the 360 emulator, and it seemed to look and run basically identically there. I couldn't get the PS3 version to work correctly in RPCS 3, with shadows and depth of field effects looking horrible. But physical copies for either of these systems are still very much available and affordable, and of course the remaster is readily available on modern platforms. Nier has some obvious flaws, some of which are correspondingly amplified on each subsequent ending route replay, but the overall experience is so intoxicating from an art and music perspective that I think everyone should give it a shot. I'm also really looking forward to giving the sequel that made Yoko Taro and his team famous a try soon as well. One last recommendation: don't name your character Gestalt like I did, trust me. Anyways, thanks for watching, see you next time.